Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. After weeks and weeks of testimony, the jury will finally have the chance to talk about the case against YNW Melly. It'll be up to 12 people to decide if the rapper killed two of his best friends or if he should walk free. We're taking you through the closing arguments from both sides.
Someone who is in that rear seat is the person who committed this murder. And so now the question is who? So I'm going to show you now why the state has proven who was Jamell Demons.
You folks are going to determine this young man's fate. And they come in here and give you alternatives.
Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome, everybody, to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber. The jury officially has the YNW Melly murder case, and the deliberations have begun. On Thursday, the attorneys on both sides had their last chance to argue the rapper's guilt or innocence. Melly, whose real name is Jamell Demons, is accused of killing two of his closest friends. The deadly shooting happened inside of an SUV in the Fort Lauderdale area of South Florida in 2018. He was seen on surveillance getting into a Jeep with Cortland Henry, Christopher Thomas, and Anthony Williams, as other friends got into a red Mitsubishi. Now, at some point during the drive to Demons' home, the defendant says he got out of the Jeep and into that Mitsubishi. And not long after that, Henry showed up at a hospital with Thomas and Williams bleeding in the car. They were both pronounced dead. Henry told investigators that there was a drive-by shooting, but police say they determined the deadly shots were fired from inside the car. They charged both Demons and Henry with murder, claiming Demons was the shooter in the back seat. Demons could face the death penalty if he's convicted. The prosecution gave their closing argument first. Prosecutor Christine Bradley used her time to remind jurors of the evidence against Demons with a focus on forensics.
The law is clear that this defendant committed 2 counts of first-degree murder. I now have the opportunity to explain all of the evidence. This chemical reacts no matter how many years later, no matter what attempt at cleanup is done. The chemical is still going to react to the presence of the blood. So then you have that reaction. And that reaction, ladies and gentlemen, tells you that someone is sitting in the seat. Because, as Detective Williams illustrated, it's where the glue star isn't. So where there is no blood. There's no blood where someone's would have been sitting. There's no blood where their legs would have been, and you can see on the V that's indicated on that. And there's no blood on the back of the seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, what does that tell you? The killer was sitting there. That the red Mitsubishi didn't stop. That the 30 minutes and 30 miles are consistent with one another. That there was no stopping on the side of the road. And also, there's no reason. There is no reason that's put before this jury whatsoever. Not in the phone records, not in the Snapchat, nothing that explains why 8 people that are going to the exact same location would stop on the side of the road. Just one person would switch a car. No reason whatsoever. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a confession in this case. 4 p.m., I did that with the smiley face. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask that you serve justice, that you deliberate, and that you return a verdict of guilty as charged as to murder in the first degree.
All right, let's talk about it. I'm joined right now by my co-host, defense attorney Brian Buckmeyer, and our special guest, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Great to have you both here. Nima, I'll start with you. You were a prosecutor. What did you think of Christine Bradley's closing?
Jesse, I got to be honest, I was a bit underwhelmed. I expected more. It was a strong case, and I think the defense did a good job in their summation. As a prosecutor in rebuttal, I like to sandbag a little bit, keep some of my best points. And I think the mistakes that were made here is she needed to pound the confession, pound that cell phone evidence. I think she was on the defensive, spent too much time trying to explain away some of the questions that the defense raised in their closing. So, talk about the victims, talk about the evidence, and again, hammer that point home. I think really she ended with a little bit of a whimper as opposed to a bang there.
Well, Nima is not convinced, Brian, but let's play devil's advocate here. Let's say, they focused on some key points like bullet trajectory, the alleged confession. For the defense, what do they have to do to combat what the prosecution put forward?
The defense has to come in and poke holes where they've already established that there are potential holes in the case. Attack the investigation. Attack the investigation in a way that says they could have done more, and if they had done more, then they would have more answers. And the lack of answers equals reasonable doubt. Continue down that pathway. Go through each one of the questions. Myself, though, I would also attack some of the math here. Yes, that outline shows that someone is there. Great, but you don't have no idea whether or not they stopped. I mean, you and I were talking just quickly. 30 miles in 30 minutes, so you think they're going 60 miles an hour then? You think they're driving the speed limit? Maybe they stopped for a second and then kept speeding on. That's easy to kind of combat. Don't open yourself up to arguments like that.
Well, let's see if they listen to your advice or, after the fact, because we have a lot more to cover after this break, including what the defense had to say in their closing arguments. But first, we want to bring you part of Thursday's Q&A session where we take your viewer questions. Correspondent Terry Austin has been inside the courtroom for all of the action and answered a question from a YouTube viewer.
So let's get to our next question. Latasha Gaffney from YouTube. The prosecutor said Melly didn't want to leave any witness behind, so why didn't he kill Cortland Henry? Do you think the jury is going to ask the same question? Do you think they caught that part? So I will send that one over to you, Terry.
So I think what the prosecution is trying to say as far as that is concerned is Melly wanted the other two, Juvy and Sakchaser, gone because he didn't want to split up the money with them, but he felt as though Henry had his back. That was one of the messages she read to the jury during her closing argument. So I'm assuming that her theory here is he left Henry alive because he was more of an asset than the others. Now, if you believe her motive for these is, the greed, the resentment, then she's saying that he did not have, Melly, the defendant, did not have any greed or resentment or any of those things as far as Henry was concerned. So that's why he allowed him to live, according to the prosecution.
Welcome back, everybody. So the jury started deliberations Thursday afternoon in the case of rapper YNW Melly, whose real name is Jamell Demons. He's charged with 2 counts of murder after his 2 friends were shot and killed in South Florida 5 years ago. In our last segment, we talked about some of the biggest moments from the prosecution's closing argument. Demons' defense team only spent about an hour delivering their closing argument and made sure to point out all the problems with the state's case.
How does a reasonable doubt occur? Well, the judges told you. It can come from the evidence itself, a conflict in the evidence, or a lack of evidence. You don't need all 3 of these areas. But I suggest to you folks that we have a reasonable doubt from the evidence that has been presented, that there is a conflict in the evidence, and there's a lack of evidence. October 26th, that day of the shooting, we learned immediately that that Jeep was taken to a secure area. And it was searched for over 15 hours by 2 crime scene technicians. And you heard how they pulled out the evidence. They got some foam, some projectiles, I think a can, everything, and photographed the vehicle. Now, why is that important? That vehicle was searched again months later. But it didn't stop there, because about 3 years later, miraculously, even though it was searched for hours by crime scene technicians, Sergeant Williams comes into the scene at the request of the state of Florida, this particular prosecutor right here, And miraculously, he finds additional evidence, 2 projectiles and a bloodstain that obviously everyone else missed. That should tell you something about the quality of this investigation. They told you that they have accepted the responsibility, that they have the burden of proof. They told you that they would prove each element of this case. What they have proved to you is that Cortland Henry is involved in this case.
And that's what I want to focus on. So Nima, Stuart Edelston, he pointed multiple times toward Cortland Henry as the real culprit. You think that's a good strategy?
I think it's a great strategy, Jesse, and we knew this is something that was going to happen. Obviously, the defense, they always like to point the finger at someone else. And when you have a co-defendant, who better person than that? So that's why defendants like to sever these trials, because the defenses tend to be inconsistent. So if you're the prosecution, you have to anticipate this coming, and you got to tell the jurors, listen, even if we don't know who pulled the trigger, whether it was Melly or Henry, it doesn't matter. You know, at least for the guilt phase. Maybe it does for the penalty, but you know, you're an accomplice, you're a co-conspirator, you're responsible for the murder. So I wish the state spent a lot more time on that, because again, it's something that I think is very important and something that they should have anticipated.
And talking about the state, Brian, we know that the prosecution actually responded to the defense's closing argument in a real quick rebuttal argument. They also, I was curious what your thoughts are on what points they made, if you thought it was effective, and also, can the jury consider manslaughter?
Yeah, so overall, I wasn't too impressed with the prosecution's rebuttal, and I'll say it like this. As a defense attorney, the one thing that I'm really jealous about for prosecutors, they get the final word. And I feel like she had that opportunity to really come back and smack down a lot of the arguments that the defense put out, but it seemed weak at point. It seemed just a rehashing of what she had already said, rather than dismantling what the defense was arguing. And then to the manslaughter part, we all kind of was like, what's going on here? Because the judge gave them the lesser included manslaughter charge, which the prosecution had argued for. Then in the middle of her closing argument in the rebuttal, she says, this is what manslaughter means, basically an act that someone takes on or perpetrates and it just causes someone's death. There's no real premeditation there. But she said, this is not manslaughter. She totally threw away the lesser included that she had won there and then just kept moving with her argument. It was bizarre.
She's going for all or nothing with the murder. And I mean, manslaughter would be interesting. It would mean like something happened in that car that caused him to do that, which would be very interesting, because that really hasn't been argued one way or another. So that's interesting.